In every corner of the world, temperatures are getting hotter. The latest data shows that we are already 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. It is becoming increasingly clear that this phenomenon is not just an academic exercise. Polar ice caps are melting, sea levels are rising, and extreme weather events are becoming more frequent. Natural disasters are now killing lives, destroying homes and shaking economies. Amidst this onslaught of tragedy, hope has emerged through international climate agreements, such as the Paris Agreement, which seeks to reduce carbon emissions and keep global warming from reaching lethal levels. Major emitting countries agreed to take part. But what if some of them only pretend to care? More than 190 countries, including major emitters such as the United States, China, the European Union, India, Indonesia, and Saudi Arabia, signed the Paris Agreement held in France in 2015. Ironically, there are countries that are trying to play sneaky, pursuing economic benefits while tinkering with the agreement. Among the signatories to the Paris Agreement are oil-rich countries that are openly reluctant to reduce their dependence on fossil fuels. Reports reveal that countries like Saudi Arabia are trying hard to maintain the status quo that keeps them wealthy from oil sales. Even the chairman of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, has not hesitated to speak out against reducing fossil fuel use. For Saudi Arabia, oil is the main source of wealth that has sustained the economy since the discovery of huge oil reserves in 1938. It was oil that built the luxurious infrastructure and grandiose projects on Saudi soil. Initially, Saudi Arabia seemed very determined to reduce its carbon emissions, which are currently ranked as the 9th largest carbon emitter. As part of its commitment to the Paris Agreement, Saudi Arabia announced a grand plan to achieve 0% carbon emissions by 2060. With lofty ambitions, they also pledged to plant 50 billion trees in the Middle East over the next few decades. Not only that, the Saudis announced plans to build the world's largest green hydrogen plant, powered by solar and wind energy in the futuristic city of Neom. However, many question the intentions behind all these grandiose plans. On the one hand, they do promote sustainability and emissions reduction. But on the other hand, Saudi Arabia still insists on maintaining their oil production. Quoted from Al Jazeera, Saudi Aramco, the Saudi oil giant, announced plans to increase oil production from 12 million barrels per day to 13 million barrels by 2027. This shows that the Saudis still want to utilize their huge oil reserves without taking the global climate consequences seriously. Saudi Arabia claims to be diversifying its economy. To prove this, it is spending heavily in areas such as mineral mining, sports, and technology. A striking example is the sport washing project, where the Saudis use sports to improve their image internationally. However, many see this as a mere image attempt, which does not address the real root of environmental problems. As another example, they are shifting their focus to mineral exploration, such as gold, copper, and zinc. This may be seen as a form of economic diversification, but in reality, it has increased mining activities that have the potential to further damage the environment. To quell criticism, the Saudis are promoting carbon capture and storage (CCS) technology as a solution to carbon emissions. This technology, in theory, captures CO2 emissions from burning fossil fuels and stores them underground. But the problem is, the technology is far from perfect, very expensive, and has not been proven effective on a large scale. Saudi Arabia claims that CCS is part of their strategy to reduce emissions without having to reduce oil production. This way, they can avoid criticism on the grounds of green technology without actually reducing emissions. CCS is a shield for the Saudis to continue producing oil while maintaining their image as a country committed to the environment. Behind the astonishing Saudi Grand Plan, there are other programs secretly created to maintain global oil consumption. For example, Saudi Aramco is actively funding the production of cheap cars designed to make them more affordable for emerging markets. In addition, they are also designing supersonic jets that are expected to entice many countries to continue using large amounts of fossil fuels. In fact, the Saudis are involved in the development of floating power plants that utilize fuel oil, infusing their oil into energy around the world. While on one hand, Saudi Arabia is trying to reduce their country's carbon emissions, on the other hand, they are also ensuring other countries remain dependent on their oil. This shows how cleverly Saudi Arabia plays with numbers. The calculation of carbon emissions only takes into account emissions released domestically, so Saudi Arabia can still produce oil without having to account for the emissions generated from the oil abroad. Saudi Arabia's efforts did not stop there. On the international stage, the Saudis used their lobbying power to influence the policies of international institutions not to take measures that could threaten the position of oil. Data from independent investigations reveal that the Saudis are actively lobbying bodies such as the United Nations so that stricter climate regulations do not affect oil sales. By promoting oil and funding research that supports their position, Saudi Arabia ensures that fossil fuels continue to flow into the global market unhindered by environmental regulations. Apart from Saudi Arabia, several other countries dependent on the fossil fuel industry are also trying to influence climate change policy in favour of their sector. Australia, one of the world's largest coal producers, is actively lobbying to reduce recommendations to reduce fossil fuel use in international scientific reports. It also supports carbon capture and storage (CCS) technology to reduce emissions, although the effectiveness of this technology is still doubted by some experts. In addition, Japan and Iran also sought to delay the phase-out of the energy transition from fossil fuels to clean energy sources. They urged the UN Climate Agency not to push too hard to reduce emissions from fossil fuels. These countries emphasized that the transition time should be long enough to avoid major economic impacts. Not to be left out, Brazil and Argentina, the world's top beef producers, sought to remove recommendations that suggest a plant-based diet to reduce emissions. They asked the climate change report to exclude the huge impact of meat consumption on carbon emissions, which is the main source of emissions in the agricultural sector. What these countries don't realize is that their profits at the expense of the climate have left small, defenseless countries victimized by the resulting disasters. Just look at Bangladesh, Chad, and the small nations of the Pacific who are just waiting for the final wave that will wipe their countries off the map forever.